Genshin Impact expanded its roster with 16 new characters in 2024. Some were trash, but we got a lot of winners this year. 3 of which made my no notes tier, 1 made my solid picks tier, and 1 will undoubtedly make my no notes tier for 5.x. Needless to say, the roster expanded in a very meaningful way this year. If this is your first time here, I'm Souldapop, and it'd be cool if you dropped a like and subscribe while I share the top 5 characters that were on my Christmas wish list this year, and how they work. Before we get started, allow me to explain how I'm ranking these. As much as I'd like to consider how well these characters pull off a pantsuit, miniskirt, booty shorts, that won't play a factor in my ranking. While individual damage contribution and DPS increase to teams are an important factor, the main thing I'm ranking them by is how useful they are on any given account. Be it early game, which I'm going to consider anything below AR45, or late game. As we're going through the list, I'll give a better picture as to what exactly that means. So without further ado, here are my picks for the top 5 new characters of 2024 and how they work. Number 5, Xianyun. Xianyun would have been number 1 or 2 on this list, no contest, if it weren't for one thing. Her kit is centered around the 70 cost burst that opens a window for a limited time to do massive damage with pretty much every character in the game. In the late game, this isn't much of an issue, but when you're just getting started with limited options for meeting her energy needs and don't have a VV set so you can at least get res shred from her, the main part of her kit is useless in combat pretty much half the time. That said, everything else from her is a boon. First and foremost, her elemental burst turns every character in the game into Xiao, allowing them to jump and plunge to their heart's content. Meaning, even if your roster is total crap, you can still put up some massive damage. This would already be really good if you invest in characters' normal attack talents, because plunge multipliers are just higher than normal and charge attack multipliers. But it gets better with her passives. Her first passive is pretty good, giving up to 10% crit rate on plunges depending on the number of enemies hit with her skill. But her second passive is what makes her insane. It adds twice Xianyun's attack to the base damage of up to 8 plunges, which is the upper limit of what characters can pull off during her burst. The cap is at 9,000, meaning unless you somehow get your Xianyun to 4,500 attack, you don't have to worry about overcapping. It doesn't stop there. Xianyun is easily the most affordable character in the game to build because you don't even have to invest in her talent. With Furina, you may want to invest in her burst to increase her healing, which, oh yeah, she heals really good, but even then, it's not entirely necessary. You don't even need to 90 her. She doesn't get a lot of swirls, has pretty much 0 crowd control, and 80 to 90 only increases her attack by 40. That does translate to a few hundred extra base damage from her passive, so it is worth it if you can, but even I, the guy who made a 3-part level 90 series, have left mine at 80 because one of the things that makes her so great is how little investment she requires. Before we move on to builds, we have to talk about the quality of life she provides. Xianyun's skill allows her to jump 3 times and dive, which trivializes overworld exploration. You can even use it to go up walls like Kazuha. In addition to that, unlike Natlan characters, your stamina regenerates while you do it, so you can immediately go back to sprinting after zooming through the sky on her while you wait on her low 12-second cooldown. But wait, there's more. Don't sleep on her exploration passive, especially early game. Increasing flying speed by 15% might seem innocuous, but in addition to getting to places a bit faster, it means you can also fly 15% farther. That's essentially an entire Statue of the 7 upgrade, and makes a massive difference in the quality of life for exploration early game. Now, builds. Either Viridus Inventor or 2-piece attack with attack percent on Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. Honestly, if you don't already have a triple attack VV set, I would recommend just going with 2-piece attack. There are a lot of sets and better domains that give it, which is the main reason I'm not recommending Song of Days Past, and you get so many Gladiators pieces just by playing the game that you'll undoubtedly have better pieces with the 2-piece combo. That's not even to mention the fact that she has a lot of teams where VV just isn't that valuable. Animo, Geo, and Spread teams can't get res shred, and the swirl setups necessary to take advantage of it in Vape teams are kind of cringe. Energy recharge subsets are the most important thing to look out for. After that, more attack percent, even flat attack since you'll get double every roll of it added to your base damage, and crit rate if you're looking to run her with FAV Codex. Speaking of FAV Codex, let's move on to weapons. For her weapons, you want weapons with high base attack, because the higher the base attack, the more every point of attack percent is worth. And you want those weapons to give the same stats you looked out for with her artifacts, attack percent and energy recharge. Her best free-to-play option is the Oathsworn Eye that gives the highest 4-star catalyst base attack, attack percent, and energy recharge after using her skill. But unfortunately, it was part of a limited event 3 years ago, so it may be unattainable for you. After that, if you're running her with an Electro character, you'd want to go with the Inazuma craftable Hyakushin Ring. Or, if you decide you want to invest in her normal attacks, you can go with the Fontaine craftable Flowing Purity. As for Gacha 4 stars, FAV Codex is great and you'll undoubtedly get a lot of them as you continue to play the game. It's a bit lower base attack, but still high for a 4-star and generates a lot of extra energy for the rest of the team, lowering their and Xianyun's energy needs, allowing them to build more damage. After that, if you don't have any other options, Wine and Song is fine as just a stat stick. For 5-star weapons, Crane's Echoing Call is her best in slot with its insanely high 741 base attack, but it's pretty much unusable without her, so I generally recommend saving your primos. If your energy needs are totally sorted, the next best option I'd recommend is Skyward Atlas. If you play long enough, you'll probably get one through the standard banner or from losing weapon banners if you decide to pull on them. Now, before we move on to number 4, I'd like to take a moment to show you my favorite Xianyun team, which just so happens to be one of the best teams on my account. This team uses Lynette, a free character, so you really want her C6 in this team, Farina, who is so good it's a problem, Farazan, and Xianyun. Lynette is on 4-piece VV, attack animal crit rate with Miss Splitter. Farina is on 4-piece Golden Troop, HP Hydro crit damage with FAV. Farazan is on 4-piece Tenacity, attack animal crit rate with FAV. And Xianyun is on 2-piece attack, attack with Skyward Atlas. We're triple Animo here with 2 FAVs and characters that generate a lot of particles, so I'm able to get away with running ER really low on my Animo characters. The rotation for the team is really fluid. Skill and burst with Farina, skill and burst with Farazan, skill, dive, and burst with Xianyun, swap to Lynette, and burst, skill, normal attack if you have Miss Splitter, followed by 4 plunges, then another skill and 4 more plunges. After that, start the rotation over with Farina. You might be wondering what makes this better than running someone like Heizo in the team. Well, if you pay attention, you'll notice Lynette's skill and burst are also hitting really hard because of Farazan and Farina. Even without plunging from Xianyun, the combination of these 3 characters can be enough to clear Abyss. Adding in Xianyun essentially doubles the damage output of that, so it's a bit nutty. Also, my Lynette's talents aren't even max, so it could be doing a lot more. Number 4, Clorinde. In my opinion, I would say Clorinde is probably tied with Raiden for the 3rd best on-fielder to pull for in the game. First and second being Neuvillette and another character on this list. Raiden is an overall better pick for your account because the energy provided by her burst and the consistent off-field from her skill can bring teams online faster and give you access to insane teams like Hyper Bloom sooner. But the reason she's in the same ballpark as Clorinde on this list is the same reason why Xianyun is lower than she'd otherwise be. Her burst is really expensive and Clorinde just doesn't need her burst. Regardless of where you're at in game, you can pick her up, activate her skill, and go to town on pretty much anything. Depending on who you have on your account, Clorinde is so good at reactions that she can even be used to decimate electro-immune / shielded enemies because she triggers reactions and other characters' abilities so effectively. In addition to that, she self-sustains. When you normal attack with her skill active, she gains Bond of Life, and when she uses her skill while it's active, she clears her Bond of Life and heals herself. She synergizes with Dendro really well, and there's 2 solid Dendro characters for free pretty early on in the game, Kale through Abyss and Dendro MC just for touching a statue of 7 in Sumeru, which you can do immediately after you're able to leave Mondstadt. You also get Barbara just for playing through the Mondstadt quest, and her skill being attached to you is generally enough Hydro to trigger blooms to use Clorinde and Quick Bloom right out of the gate. Now, Aggravate and Hyper Bloom definitely don't scale as well early game, but with Clorinde, you get additional base damage on top of your aggravates based on your attack, on top of the fact you're getting a lot of additional damage from all the reactions she's enabling. And she's kind of just out of the box ready to go. She even gives herself crit rate with her passive, which regardless of where you are in game, is generally the stat characters are starved for the most. Her builds are also pretty straightforward. Whimsy is her best set, but you'll get a lot of glad pieces just by playing the game, and it's so close that more often than not, it will actually be better than Whimsy because you just have more pieces to pick through. As for free-to-play weapons, Finale of the Deep and Fontaine, or even Iron Sting and Mondstadt, especially if you're going the Quick Bloom route, are even great for her in-game. If you get the Battle Pass, Black Sword is really good on her and is the option I generally go with. As for 5 stars, Absolution is her best in slot, but the only way it can be used for other characters is if you have Siege Wing, and you don't want Siege Wing. If you think you do, you're wrong. Rather than pull for that, Mist Splitter is a really good weapon for almost every sword character. But if you want to be a stickler, Ayato's Haran is slightly better. My absolute favorite team with Clorinde is Burning Load. The team I'm going to show off here is Clorinde, Nahida, Emily, and Thoma. And I recognize not a lot of people have Emily, but she isn't really necessary here. Really, the only character that is necessary for this is Clorinde, because she's the only character that applies on-field electro fast enough to have both Quicken and Burning. Thoma is replaceable with Zhongling, Nahida is somewhat replaceable but still highly recommended with Kale, Yao Yao, Kirara, or Baiju, and Emily can be replaced with Bennett, another character we're about to talk about, Fischl, Beidou, Zhongling, really any Pyro, Electro, or Dendro character with buffs or off-field damage. If I wasn't using Emily just for the sake of memes, I'd be using Unfinished Reverie on Clorinde. It only works for her in Burning Load, so it's not worth building just for this funny team. Generally, as mentioned before, you'll want to go attack electro crit damage on Whimsy or Glad. So I'll be using Whimsy with Black Sword. TF is a meme and it isn't worth your resin. Next is Nahida on Depoid, EM Dendro crit rate with 1000 Floating Dreams. Emily on Unfinished Reverie, attack Dendro crit rate with Fab Lance, and Thoma is going to be on triple EM Gilded with Fab Lance. He's going to be triggering a fair amount of burning and overload damage, and with overload being buffed, it isn't an insignificant portion of the team's DPS. We're going to lead with Clorinde's burst to apply Electro, then Nahida's skill and burst, then Emily's skill. This will be the only time we cast Emily's skill because her burst refreshes it and using her skill resets its level. Then Thoma's skill and burst, move back to Emily to burst, then go to Clorinde, skill twice since we already have Bond of Life from her burst, and do N3 skills until her skill ends. Then back to Nahida, skill and burst with Emily, skill and burst with Thoma, followed by skill on Clorinde and more N3 skills until we get back to Nahida to do the previous rotation again. Number 3, Chevreuse. Chevreuse is one of the best, if not the best 4-star that's been added to Genshin in years. Remember how Xianyun dropped way down the list because of her burst cost impacting her viability early game? Well, Chevreuse doesn't have that problem. In fact, you don't need her burst. Chevreuse has a lot of things that make her a great addition to any roster, and none of them require her burst. First, there's her Ascension 1 passive that grants 40% resistance shred when your party contains only Electro and Pyro characters and triggers an overload reaction. This triggers when anyone at any time causes overload, so it doesn't even require any specific know-how and mechanics to take advantage of. Just have a team with nothing but those 2 elements, and you'll have pretty much 100% uptime on it just by hitting random buttons. But hey, maybe you don't want to limit yourself to just those 2 elements, and that's still fine, because her Ascension 4 gives up to 40 attack percent when using her hold skill after triggering an overload. How do you get it up to that? Just by stacking HP on her. But we'll revisit that in a second, because the next thing we need to talk about is her C6, because it gives up to 60% damage bonus to Pyro and Electro characters when they are healed by her skill, which, oh yeah, her skill also heals. And the C6 also gives a team-wide heal, so even your off-field characters can get it. I'd also like to note that if you're using her without an Electro, just to give the C6 buff to your Pyro teammates, you can just tap her skill because the buff is granted by her healing, which you get just for using her skill at all. Just like Xiangyun, you really don't have to invest in her talents at all. Granted, it's very funny to use her as a damage dealer when the Hydro Tulpa shows up in Abyss, but outside of that, there's really no reason to dump materials into them unless, like Xiangyun, you want her heals to improve. In addition to that, she generates 4 particles when casting her skill, which makes funneling energy into Xiangling a lot more efficient than with Bennett, who you sometimes would have to swap back into just to do another skill. And since you don't need her burst, and her buffs aren't tied down to a certain area, she's almost always a far more convenient option than him. Think about that. I'm saying she can be preferable over Bennett, who is still arguably the best character in the game. For her builds, I already alluded to it, but you just want to stack HP until you can get the 40k HP. The set doesn't matter that much. Song of Days Past, Clam, Noblesse, hell, Crimson Witch if you want to troll the Hydro Tulpa is even fine. For weapons, you can use the Fontaine Craftable Rightful Reward, the recent event-exclusive Dialogue to Desert Sages if you have it, or even Black Tassel, which you definitely have or will have if you ever bother to wish or explore any of the 3 Liyue regions. And since it's a 3-star weapon, it's really, really cheap to build. I give her Homa because it looks cool, and I do in fact enjoy trolling the Hydro Tulpa. Homa not only gives additional HP percent, but it also converts HP percent into attack, allowing you to still build her to give your team high buffs with her A4 while dealing out wacky numbers too. For Chevreuse, I want to show you one of her many 4-star teams. For this team, I'm using Yanfei with Attack Pyro crit damage on Wanderer's Troop with Lost Prayers, Fischl with Attack Electro crit rate on Golden Troop with Skyward Harp, Xiangling on Attack Pyro crit rate with Engulfing Lightning, and Chevreuse on triple HP Song of Days Past with Homa. Yes, everyone has a 5-star weapon. Witches for Yanfei, Stringless for Fischl, Catch for Xiangling, and the previously mentioned weapons for Chevy are almost just as good. I'm just going with these for swag purposes and because they make it easier to balance my ratios with the artifacts that I have. Since Fischl is our only Electro, we're going to lead with a charge attack from her, then burst with Chevreuse. You won't need to bother with it until the next chamber, so you should never worry about having it when you need it to start a rotation. After you burst with Chevreuse, you'll have an overcharge bullet to use with her hold skill. After that, swap to Xiangling and burst so the particles from Chevreuse skill aren't wasted, and then use Xiangling's skill. Swap back to Fischl, use her skill, then go to Yanfei, burst, charge attack, skill, charge attack, and do N2Cs until her burst ends. Use another skill and then start the rotation again from Chevreuse's skill. In the second rotation, you'll burst with Fischl, and if Yanfei's burst isn't up, you'll use skill, charge attack, and N3Cs until you can use her skill again. Number 2, Arlecchino. Arlecchino is great. Just like Clorinde, she works out of the box and only requires investment into one talent, her normal attack. Unlike Clorinde, Arlecchino doesn't really care about triggering reactions. Don't get me wrong, she hits really hard with vapes, but she doesn't need them to go Unga Bunga. Also, like Clorinde, her best sets are Whimsy and Glad, and she has some great free-to-play options for her weapons. The one that gets the most attention is White Tassel, which is a good choice early game when you're exploring Liyue because it's cheap to build. However, Arlecchino is really squishy when she doesn't have a weapon with a higher base attack, so that's something to keep in mind. As far as other free-to-play options, Blacklift Pole and Royal Sphere are good choices that you'll need to save up some Star Glitter for, and if you're picking between the two, Blacklift Pole is the obvious choice. One particularly good option that gets slept on is the Lithic Sphere. Liyue consistently churns out strong supports. You'll inevitably build for a lot of your teams, and it gives an absurd amount of stats. But Deathmatch from the Battle Pass is generally the 4-star people gravitate towards the most. I generally recommend it a bit less because, like White Tassel, the base attack is really low. As for 5 stars, of course her signature is her best in slot, and I generally don't recommend it for the exact same reason I don't recommend Absolution on Clorinde. You really can't go wrong with any of the 5-star polearms, but the one I generally recommend is Primordial Jadewing Sphere. Arlecchino works by using her skill on enemies and then charge attacking after 5 seconds to claim Bond of Life. The amount of damage she does is based on the amount of Bond of Life she has, and every normal attack drains her Bond of Life. So you'll generally do less damage the longer you're on field with her. Primordial Jadewing Spear increases attack the longer you're on field, so it helps keep her damage a bit more balanced throughout her field time. As a standard banner weapon, it's something you'll likely get incidentally just by playing long enough, so it's even somewhat accessible as a free-to-play player. The team we're going to use is another Overload team because I just can't get enough of Chevreuse in this video. This time around we're going to have Arlecchino on 4-piece Glad with Jadewing Spear, Attack, Pyro, Crit Rate. Chevreuse and Fischl are on the same builds as before, and Beto is going to be on 4-piece Emblem, Attack, Electro, Crit Rate with Cardboard Sword. It's another limited time weapon, but Fav and the Inazuma craftable are also good options. You'll begin the rotation with Arlecchino's skill. As you're moving through the rest of your units, the mark will charge so you can claim the max amount of Bond of Life when you return to her. After you use her skill, you'll skill and burst with Beto. Then you'll use Chevreuse's hold skill with Fischl, and charge attack with Arlecchino to claim her Bond of Life. I didn't manage my energy very well, so I need to swap back to Beto to cast another skill, but ideally, or if you were using Fav, you wouldn't have to. After that, I spam normal attacks with Arlecchino until her skill is off cooldown and do it all again. I know it's tempting to stay on Arla because she still has Bond of Life, but remember, the lower her Bond of Life, the less damage she does. You can get 2 times your HP worth of Bond of Life, and the Bond of Life stacks between rotations on Arlecchino, so it's better to let it stack so you can do even more damage in the following rotation. If your Arla gets the bad touch, you can use her burst to heal herself if you need to, but it clears all your Bond of Life, completely negating the stacking mechanic I was just talking about. So I generally recommend running her with someone who shields or has some means of damage reduction / mitigation. Before we move on, I'd like to give an honorable mention to Auroron. He's the first character to deal damage without ever being swapped to, and that's really cool. And you also still want to swap to him though, because his burst is really good and he generates a lot of particles when casting his skill. And they also buffed Electro Charge to Kingdom Come just to make him feel more like a 5-star character. He's a really solid unit, but he's just not as good of a pickup as the other 5 characters on this list. Also, people are really sleeping on the double jump. It's insanely useful, especially early game. Finally, number 1 is Xilonen. Just like most other characters I picked for this list, most of the value in her kit is tied to her skill, so you don't have to worry about energy in the early game. And like every character on this list, she's insanely resource efficient because the only talent you need to invest into is her skill. Reshred is always good, but it's particularly useful in the early game when you can't farm the VV set yet. In addition to that, you can give her practically any artifact set and she'll do her job. Her Reshred doesn't depend on any particular stat, just the talent levels of her skill. Even if you decide you do care about the healing from her burst, which only costs 60 energy, so it's even manageable in the early game, or you want her to do actual damage, she scales entirely with defense, which is just as easy to get as the HP stats on Chevreuse. Not only that, but she, at least at the moment, is the best character to give the busted Hero Cinder City set to. Though Kachina and Auroron are definitely better at using it, Xilonen is currently one of the best characters in the game, hands down, so if you had to pick between them, for anything but Quick Bloom, she's the one you should give it to. For her build, blah 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 signature. This one though is actually a pretty solid pickup to generally have, but it's not as account shattering as something like Mist Splitter, Thousand Floating Dreams, Key, Homa, or Engulfing Lightning. Instead, she has a dope free-to-play weapon in the form of Fluid of Espetal with a death secondary stat and an effect that further increases her death. There's even a free one you get for solving the puzzle in the new area. Aside from that, the next option I'd recommend, and the one I use the most often, is Fav. Since she scales with defense, you don't care about the base attack at all, so the low base attack on Fav's sword doesn't matter. And we can't move on to teams without mentioning how great she is for exploration. See a cliff? Climb that cliff. Want to move a bit faster? Skate across the ground. Need to jump higher? She got hop. Oddly enough, she jumps higher than Kirara does in box form, but Kirara can plunge attack from her jump and Xilonen can't. Aside from Furina, I'd say Xilonen and Xianyun are the closest things we've got to must-pulls. And I cannot articulate how frustrating it is that both of these characters were seemingly built to be used with Farina. She's inescapable. Speaking of Farina, I managed to only use her in one team so far, which is kind of incredible considering the number of videos I've shelved, because I realized Farina was in every freaking team I recommended, so I think it will be fine to use Farina one more time. For this team, I'm going to use Neuvillette, Farina, Shallonen, Kazuha. Yes, it's an all 5-star team, but I'm doing this to make a point. These are 3 of the best characters in the game, bar none. None of them needed a buff. But along came Shallonen and was like, what if we took the 3 of them and made that team better anyway? It gets worse because this jerk is going to be in Abyss eventually, and you're going to want Vivi and Shallonen for him because he has 60% elemental res to all elements. They designed the boss specifically so you'd want to run a team where 2 characters can get you over 60% res shred. Everyone was freaking out about how busted her C2 is, but the extent to which she is whale bait goes far beyond that. She's designed to make you want to pull those 3 characters. It's like Baiju and Sino, but infinitely more busted. Anyway, let's get into the build. Triple Def Scroll Center City on Shallonen with Fav Sword, triple EMVV on Kazuha with Fav Sword, the same build on Farina as before, but pipe instead of Fav. We have enough Fav and Prototype Amber on Neuvillette. With 4-piece Marsh, they'll say HP Hydro crit rate on Neuvillette, cringe. He got Prototype Amber, give me a break. It puts him at 85, 170. You think I want to break that perfect ratio? I start the rotation with Neuvillette's skill, then Farina's burst and skill. Every rotation after this, I'll use skill and burst. It's just that catching those particles on Farina is nice at the start. After that, Shallonen skill, burst, and normal attacks until the meter fills up and you hear the fat beat. That's what activates her res shred. After that, Kazuha's skill and burst if it's up. Back to Neuvillette, burst, charge attack, skill, charge attack, and move through the rotation again from Farina. I can't say this enough. The Neuvillette, Farina, Kazuha combo was broken enough with Zhongli or Baiju. It didn't need this, but here we are. I will say Lynette is also really good here because you're sacrificing beefy shields for crystallized shields. Lynette's burst keeps enemies off Neuvillette and in one place so he can blast them more easily. Practically speaking, he can be better than Kazuha here because you cannot dodge while you're charge attacking. If you find that you can't get by with the crystallized shields alone, I'd honestly recommend swapping out Kazuha for. That is until we get an Anemo Shielder, which... stop buffing Neuvillette and give us abysses that want someone beside him. Merry Christmas. Bye.